This episode contains mention of violence and criminal punishment. Listener discretion is advised.
The Indian Ocean is the most traveled body of water in the world. Once the Sumerians fastened a sail to their ships and left the Persian Gulf, trading and traveling became synonymous. One by one, a constellation of ports were built up along the edge of these waters, from eastern Africa to Southeast Asia. The maritime Silk Road was much more influential than its terrestrial counterpart, and it allowed a wider variety of players to get in the game. For over 1,000 years, vastly different groups traded large quantities of items, more than any camel could carry on its back. As the trading increased, so did the ships. The vessels became bigger, faster, and sturdier. They yoked the monsoon winds and were pushed and pulled by the weather. For thousands of years, these cultures that lived along the Indian and Western Pacific Oceans all circled and crossed each other, exchanging goods, ideas, beliefs, inventions, and sometimes germs. And in 1889, it is here in these well-traveled waters that Nellie Bly and Elizabeth Bisland will continue a tradition and cross each other as well. I'm Adrien Behn, and this is Strangers Abroad, a race around the world, based on the true story of Nellie Bly. The South China Sea is the farthest eastern edge of the maritime Silk Road. The Philippines, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Borneo, the Belly of China, and the eastern edge of Vietnam make a small oval that encompasses the South China Sea. These countries have traded with each other since the idea of trading began. And in mid-December of 1889, both women are gliding through it. Their little blue dots inch closer to each other, blinking faster and faster. Then, on the 36th day of travel, both women pass each other. Now Nellie still doesn't even know that Liz is racing her, and Liz does not care that she's in a race. Liz is heading southwest to Singapore as Nellie heads northeast to Hong Kong. As they respectively cross one another, their paths tie a knot around the earth. Both have had their own trials and joys, hiccups and headaches, and fascination with all that they have seen. But for you and I, listener, this is the part of the story where the retracing begins. The fastest way around the world hits the same locations, either east or west. So as Nellie and Liz unknowingly sail past one another, they're both about to touch down on all of the places that their competition has already explored. And it all starts with a monsoon. Now, Nellie is used to the 4 seasons, but near the equator it boils down to 2, the wet or dry season. And currently, Nellie is getting splashed in the face with the wet season. The evening we sailed to Hong Kong, the next day the sea was rough, and headwinds made the run slower than we had hoped for. Towards noon, almost all passengers disappeared. The roughness increased, and the cook enjoyed a holiday. When she gets a chance, she creeps up on deck to watch the monsoon in all of its wreck and beauty. The terrible swell of the sea during the monsoon was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. I would sit breathless on deck, watching the bow of the ship stand upright on a wave, then dash headlong down as if intending to carry us to the bottom. She laughs in the thrill of it all. Nellie grabs onto an iron bar as her body undulates with the movement of the waves. All around her, she watches as dozens of waves become 10, 15 feet high as they swell and break around her. She jolts and smiles with each crash of the waves. Nellie loves a thrill. Waterfalls are boring because they're just in one spot. But with a monsoon, Nellie gets to flirt with the death instinct. This is the high seas adventure she's been craving. And the drama doesn't slow down from there. Now, Nellie isn't the only person on deck. A number of men who couldn't keep their dinners down come up and try to get some cool air. These men lie down on deck chairs after succumbing to mal de mer. And one of these men takes a fancy to Nellie and insists on flirting with her in between upchucks. One man who had been quite attentive to me became seasick. I was relieved when I heard it. Still, I felt very cruel when I would see his pale face and hear him plead for sympathy. As heartless as I thought I was, I could not sympathize with the seasick man. Gross. No one wants a rain-soaked man reeking of vomit to flirt with them. But he persists. He would quietly curl up on his rugs at my feet, and there lie, in all his misery, gazing up at me. At various points on their tumultuous journey, this man comes up to her and says things like,
"You would not think that I'm enjoying a vacation, but I am. You don't know how nice I can look. If you would only stay over in Hong Kong for a week, you would see how nice I can look."
Now, the ship is too small for Nellie to blow him off, and everyone else on the ship picks up on this man's obsession with Nellie. It becomes a running joke. Nellie is mildly annoyed and tells some of her new shipmates that he is bothering her. Now, being good fast friends, her shipmates tell this creepy man that she is engaged to the chief officer of the ship, who does not approve of her talking to other men. But does that stop him? If anything, it increases his devotion, and his advances continue.
Day 38, December 21st.
One stormy night, Nellie goes out on deck alone. She sits in a chair and is enjoying the view of the storm. Then, out of the darkness and noise, Nellie doesn't notice that behind her, her obsessor appears. He quickly comes up in front of her and puts both of his hands on the arms of Nellie's chair and crouches over her, forehead to forehead. Nellie's body tenses. She's cornered. She feels his clammy temple pressed against hers. Before Nellie can say anything, he starts talking wildly.
Do you think life is worth living?
What is going on?
Nellie tries to look around from the corners of her eyes. No one else is on deck. She tries to keep her cool. With a whimpered smile and a fake cheer in her voice.
Yes, life is very sweet. The thought of death is the only thing that causes me unhappiness.
Oh God, why did you mention death? Change the subject.
You cannot understand it, or you would feel different. I could take you in my arms and jump overboard, and before they would know, we would be at rest.
You cannot tell. It might not be rest.
I know. I can show you. I will prove it to you. Death by drowning is a peaceful slumber, a quiet drifting away.
Nellie turns as straight and stiff as a pencil. She is nervous if she makes any sudden movements. He will grab her and practice his theory on her. So she keeps him talking.
Is it? How about you tell me about it?
As she looks out the corners of her eyes again to see if maybe someone has come on board.
Just as he began to speak, I saw the chief officer on deck and slowly advance towards me. I dared not call. I dared not smile, lest he should notice.
The chief officer clocks Nellie and the man. Then he turns away to go back down to the lower decks, but instead decides to play a joke. The chief officer slowly tiptoes up behind the crazed man, who is still cornering Nellie and frothing at the mouth about how wonderful heaven will be. The officer claps the poor fellow on the back and says,
"What a very pretty love scene."
Nellie then grabs the hands of the chief officer and hustles them down to the lower deck. The chief officer laughs the whole time, thinking he's just played a funny joke. But once they're away from the crazed man, Nellie turns and informs the chief officer about the plot for a seaside murder-suicide. The chief officer's smile turns to a grimace, and he consults the ship's captain. They decide to lock the crazed man up for the remainder of the trip. But for reasons beyond my comprehension, Nellie protests. She doesn't want him to be locked up. She just won't be alone on deck anymore. Ugh, can't a woman just enjoy a storm in peace? As Nellie calms down from this harassment, the sea doesn't. That night, the monsoon sea washes over the ship in a frightful manner. The ship feels like a rubber duck tossed about in the ocean.
I thought it was very possible that I had spoken my last word to any mortal. If the ship did go down, no one would be able to tell whether I had gone around the world in 75 days or not. The thought was very comforting at the time, for I felt that I might not get around in 100 days. I could have worried myself over my impending fate had I not been a great believer in letting unchangeable affairs go their way. I thought if the ship goes down, there is enough time to worry when it's going. All of the worry in the world cannot change it one way or the other. And if the ship does not go down, I only wasted my time. So I went to sleep and slumbered soundly until breakfast.
Nellie is rocked back and forth in the chaotic arms of Mother Nature. She lets go. She can't negotiate or bribe the weather to calm down. Something shifts in Nellie. She starts to understand that she has to ride with what the world throws at her.
Day 39. December 22nd.
When she wakes up the next and last morning, the South China Sea regained its composure. And with the exception of the crazed man, everyone on the ship is in good spirits.
In the evening of December 22nd, we all sat on deck in a dark corner. We all felt an eagerness for morning, and yet the eagerness was mingled with much that was sad. Knowing that early in the day we would reach Hong Kong, and while it would bring us new scenes and new acquaintances, it would take us from old friends.
Nellie Bly on time! She reached Singapore yesterday and is off for Hong Kong!
Day 40. December 23rd.
Although they had faced a monsoon head-on and sailed against the trade winds, Nellie and her boat make it to Hong Kong 2 days ahead of schedule. The ship has broken all previous records. Nellie is elated by this news, and she has really made up for those lost days in Ceylon. When the long stretch of Hong Kong's smooth mountain peaks come into view, she can finally breathe easy.
We first saw the city of Hong Kong in the early morning. Gleaming white were the castle-like homes on the tall mountainside. A cannon was fired as they entered the bay. The space of the bay was very narrow and already filled with ships, so they give off a warning signal.
What a welcome to Hong Kong! And as per usual, the moment Nellie lands, she hurries to get out. She is worried that the delay in Ceylon made her miss the P&O steamer to San Francisco. So the first thing she wants to do is go to the P&O office and secure her ticket to Japan. Her friend, Dr. Brown, also joins her. And together they hop off the gangplank and onto 2 sedan chairs. Just like Liz, Nellie feels strange about being carried around by 2 men. But she sits down on the chair and enjoys the scene. 38 days out of New York, and Nellie Bly is in China. The other side of the world. And hopefully she doesn't have enough time to explore actual China. Nellie and Dr. Brown make their way to the P&O office. Once they arrive,
I went to the P&O office, feeling very much elated over my good fortune, with never a doubt but that it would continue.
And when they enter the P&O office, they see a man behind the counter.
Will you tell me the date for the first sailing for Japan?
The employee squints his eyes at Nellie. Then he jets back and says,
Certainly. In 1 moment.
And scurries back into a back office. When he returns, another man is with him and also looks at Nellie with inquiry. Nellie repeats her question.
What is your name?
Nellie Bly.
Oh, you'd better come back here.
And they usher her into a back office. It's a windowless, dark little room, tightly packed with stacks of papers everywhere. The office manager is sitting around these paper towers and welcomes them in.
Come in, come in.
He beckons both Nellie and Dr. Brown to sit. The manager looks Nellie in the eyes and says,
You are going to be beaten.
What? I think not. I have made up for my delay.
Still surprised, wondering if the Pacific had sunk since my departure from New York, or if all the ships on that line had been destroyed. That had to have been the only option.
You're going to lose it.
Lose it? I don't understand what you mean.
This man is crazy.
Aren't you having a race around the world?
Yes, quite right. I am racing with time.
Time? I don't think that is her name.
Her? Her? Who is her?
Nellie finds herself stuck in an Abbott and Costello routine and becomes increasingly flustered.
Yes, the other woman. She is going to win. She left here 3 days ago.
I repeatedly thought, poor fellow, he is quite unbalanced, and wondered if I dared wink at the doctor to suggest to him the advisability of making our good escape.
Did you not know? The day you left New York, another woman started out to beat your time, and she's going to do it.
I stared at him. I turned to the doctor, and I wondered if I was awake. I concluded that the man was quite mad, so I forced myself to laugh in an unconcerned manner. But I was only about to say stupidly,
The other woman?
She left here 3 days ago. Her editor offered $1,000 or $2,000 to the O&O if they would have the Oceanic leave San Fran 2 days ahead of time. They would not do it, but they did their best to get her here in time to catch the English mail for Ceylon. If they had not arrived long before they were due, she would have missed that boat and so would have been delayed 10 days. But she caught the boat and left 3 days ago. And you will be delayed here 5 days.
Nellie feels the blood drain from her face and listens as the man tells her that steamships are being bribed to leave ports early to ensure that her competitor gets ahead no matter what. Nellie starts to feel seasick, even though she's standing on solid ground. Her heart flutters so intensely it has the speed and fury of a caged bird trying to escape. As her brain calculates the math of another woman being ahead of time and now behind and having to stay in Hong Kong for 5 days, this might have been the first moment in her life where Nellie Bly is rendered silent. She knows she needs to stay composed, so she swallows her feelings and musters.
Well, that is rather hard, isn't it?
Her lips pinch together, and she makes some kind of a smile that does not come from the heart. All of the excitement of her adventure evaporates.
I'm astonished you did not know anything about it. She led us to suppose that it was an arranged race.
I do not believe my editors would arrange a race without advising me. Do you have any cables or messages for me from New York?
Nothing.
She bites her tongue hard. She feels the vein on her neck throbbing.
Why would my editors not tell me? Can I even trust this man? How credible is all of this?
They probably do not know about her.
Yes, they do.
What?
Nellie feels shivved.
Why wouldn't my editors tell me?
I do not understand it.
Too proud to show my ignorance on a subject of vital importance to my well-doing.
She switches gears and tries to focus on the other annoying piece of news.
You say I cannot leave here for 5 days.
No, and I don't think you can get to New York in 80 days. Miss Bisland intends to do it in 70. She has letters to steamship officials at every point requesting them to do all they can to get her on. Have you any letters?
Only one, from the agent of the P&O, requesting the captains of their boats to be good to me because I am traveling alone. That is all. Huh.
She looks down and sees her left hand furiously twisting her ring on her finger. Suddenly, the world is spinning too fast.
Well, it's too bad, but I think you've lost it. There is no chance for you. You will lose 5 days here and 5 in Yokohama, and you are sure to have a slow trip across this season.
A glacial silence fills the room. All Nellie can hear is the sound of every gear turning in her head and all of her emotions shouting at each other. Then a young man with soft black eyes enters the room. He comes up to Nellie and introduces himself as Mr. Furman, the purser of the Oceanic, the ship that Nellie will travel on to Japan and back to America. He takes Nellie's hands firmly, and his soft black eyes look deeply into Nellie's green ones.
He had such a look of sympathy that it only needed his kind tone to cheer me into a happier state.
I went down to the harbour to meet you. The office manager thought it was better. We want to take good care of you now that you're in our charge, but unfortunately I missed you. I returned to the hotel, and as they knew nothing about you there, I came here, fearing that you were lost.
I have found kind friends everywhere.
Nellie tilts her head towards the doctor,
who was speechless over the ill luck that had befallen me.
I am so sorry to have been so much trouble to you.
Trouble? You are with your own people now, and we are only too happy if we can be of service. You must not mind about the possibility of someone getting around the world in less time than you may do it. You have had the worst connections it is possible to make, and everyone knows that the idea originated with you, and that the others are merely trying to steal the work of your brain. So whether you get in before or later, people will give you the credit of having originated the idea.
Well, thank you. That is what I would like to hear.
Like a new tooth, the news broke through the skin of Nellie's reality. She takes a deep breath.
Energy rightly applied and directed can accomplish anything.
She looks down at her shoes. This one pair of shoes has taken her all the way to China, and they will take her all around the world if she has anything to do about it. The men in the room are staring at Nellie. Then she rolls her shoulders back and looks up. She starts pumping herself up like a boxer getting back into the ring.
I promised my editor I would go around the world in 75 days, and if I accomplish that, I shall be satisfied. I am not racing with anyone. I would not race. If someone else wants to do this trip in less time, that is their concern. If they take it upon themselves to race against me, it is their lookout that they succeed. I am not racing. I promised to do the trip in 75 days, and I will do it. Although, had I been permitted to make the trip when I first proposed it over a year ago, I should have done it in 60 days.
Nellie has the fuel inside of her strong enough to change the axis of the Earth. She makes up her mind. Even if time is against her, technology gets in her way. Boats are too slow and mail is still too few and far between.
Nellie Bly will not be outdone.
The only thing she can control is herself. So if another woman is going to be in the race, Nellie will be the one to have the better story. For the second half of her trip, Nellie laces herself up and becomes all business. The lazy days on the ship are gone. It is time to get back to work. She arranges for a transfer of her luggage and monkey with a straight face and heads to her hotel. When she gets there, she refuses all pleasantries and offers from others. The wife of a local Hong Kong gentleman offers her home to Nellie. And after some back and forth and politely declining,
Despite her pleadings, I assured her I was not on a pleasure bend, but on business. I considered it my duty to refrain from social pleasures, devoting myself to things that lay more in the line of work.
and at her hotel, she meets
A number of people who were interested in my trip and were ready and anxious to do anything they could to contribute to my pleasure during my enforced stay. I had but one dress, and I refused to attend receptions that were proposed in my honor.
Nellie can't carry anyone else's emotional baggage. Now, Nellie has more than enough time to sit in her feelings and do some sightseeing. And Mr. Furman continues to be a great host for her extended stay in Hong Kong.
Day 41, December 24th.
The next day, Nellie does everything she's supposed to do in Hong Kong. She passes through the Happy Valley. This is a tiered, multi-religious graveyard where Buddhists, Christians, Catholics, Muslims, Jews, locals, and foreigners are buried. She passes by Chinese fortune tellers, who she calls professional writers. She hikes up to Victoria's Peak. She saw a play of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and while she sits in the theater, she chuckles to herself about how 2 weeks ago she was in dusty Aden. It doesn't seem so far away to her now. Nellie writes everything down in great detail, all fueled by the thought that another woman is racing her somewhere on the planet. So Nellie finds creative ways to properly kill time.
So on Christmas Eve, I started for the city of Canton.
Later that night, Nellie goes onto a smaller P&O ship headed to mainland China. She's introduced to the captain, who was an American and had lived in China for years.
I was warned not to be surprised if the Chinamen should stone me while I was in Canton. I was told that Chinese women usually spat in the faces of female tourists when the opportunity was offered.
Nellie questions this, given how accommodating all people around the world had been to her, from sailors to locals. After their dinner, she goes up to her happy place, the deck of the ship. And looking up, she notices that there's no moon on that warm Christmas Eve night.
I went on deck, where everything was buried in darkness. Softly and steadily the boat swam on. The only sound, the most refreshing and restful sounds in the world, was the lapping of the water. To sit on a quiet deck to have a starlit sky, the only light above or around, to hear the water kissing the brow of the ship, is to me paradise. They can talk of the companionship of men, the splendor of the sun, the softness of moonlight, the beauty of music. But give me a willow chair on a quiet deck, and the world with its worries and noise and prejudices are lost in the distance. The glare of the sun, the cold light of the moon, blotted out by the black darkness of night, let me rest. Rocking gently by the rolling sea in a nest of velvety darkness. Only light, the soft twinkling of the myriad of stars in the quiet sky above. But away with dreams. This is a workaday world, and I am racing time around it.
Day 42, December 25th.
Nellie wakes up the next day on the boat and has breakfast with the other travelers who will be taking a local tour. Their guide is Ah Cum. He is a flamboyant local guide who knows every nook and cranny of Canton. He's been doing this tour for 20 years and spoke perfect English. He's dressed in a vibrant pattern of silks. And the first thing he says is,
"Merry Christmas!"
She tries not to think about her mom at home all alone in their apartment in frigid New York, but she appreciates Ah Cum's sentiment, and his dramatics distract her. They all get off of the boat, and an army of sedan chairs are waiting for them. Ah Cum's sedan chair was a neat arrangement of black silk hangings, tassels, fringes, and black wood poles finished with brass knobs. Everyone else sits in their rented willow chairs with their ordinary covers. He's a man of refined taste, and from his mobile throne, Ah Cum boasts about how he's never left Canton. Canton is his city, and he's going to show them the best time around for foreigners. Their first stop is the neighborhood where Westerners lived. They pass through streets redolent of fish, human sweat, and joss sticks. The writer in Nellie appreciates the street names. The street of the right cloud, the street of the ascending dragon, the street of 100 grandsons, the street of 9-fold blessings, the street of 1,000-fold peace. These are way better names than Delancey, Broadway, and Wall Street.
In each shop, the front had a bookkeeper with tortoiseshell-rimmed glasses of an enormous size, which lent them to a look of tremendous wisdom. And in the back of each shop is an altar, gay in color, often expensive in adornment. Ah Cum sees that we visit no shops where he is not paid his little fee.
Nellie, being on her trip of culture and business, respects the man who also prioritizes culture and business.
The streets are so narrow. I thought at first I was being carried through the aisles of some great market. Awnings stretched over the streets as vertical signs of crimson and gold hung in the storefronts. When Ah Cum told me I was not in a market, but in the streets of the city of Canton, my astonishment knew no limit.
Nellie notices that many of the streets are dedicated to a single industry. Fishmongers, jade merchants, silk sellers, all alternate. Incense burn on every shop door, and they bring her back to Chinatown in New York. In New York, just a few narrow streets try to replicate the comforts of home. They did their best to bring the most authentic parts of their homeland with them. The incense burn for all of the Chinese gods and idols that are as varied as the street names. The god of the somber heavens, the god of the southern seas, the god of happy wealth. In New York, these incense are nothing more than curios of another culture. But here, they have context. Chinatown will always be a town. It will grow and evolve and assimilate into its own beautiful community. But it's so different than being in the motherland, marinating in the context and resources of how this culture and people evolved. They cross over onto islands where European-styled buildings are surrounded by banyan trees bowing overhead. Boats slowly float by in the canals in the water, carrying baskets of oranges and eggplants. Then they turn a corner, and Nellie sees something she hasn't seen in over a month: the American flag flying high.
Here, for the first time since leaving New York, I saw the Stars and Stripes. It was floating over the gateway to the American consulate. It's a strange fact that the further one goes from home, the more loyal one becomes. I felt I was a long way off from my own dear land. It was Christmas Day, and I had seen so many different countries since I had last gazed upon our own. The moment I saw it floating there in the soft, lazy breeze, I took off my cap and said, "That is the most beautiful flag in the whole world."
This adds to her homesickness. One would think that since she is a news reporter and legally has no rights back home, Nellie would have a more critical eye on the American system by now. Yet she cannot help this strange surge of pride that always comes up for air when you have been away from your home for so long. No matter how flawed your mother country is, it will always be your home. Nellie's heart squeezes as she quietly wishes she was in America and with her family today. But the tour keeps moving. Nellie goes through the streets and thinks about that gross stereotype about Chinese women.
However, I had no trouble. They showed no sign of animosity, but the few women I met looked curiously at me. The thing that seemed to interest the people most about me were my gloves. Sometimes they were bold enough to touch them, and they would always gaze upon them with looks of wonder.
Then they leave the island and return to the tight and winding streets of Canton. Occam leads them through until they arrive at a shop where women are arranging pottery. Occam dismounts, and everyone follows suit. He leads them through a crooked back alley that opens up to another yard, lined by high stone walls with the sun beating down on them. The city noise hushes behind them, and the space grows quiet. Nellie feels an ominous energy that she can't place.
I noticed the ground in one place was very red, and when I asked Occam about it, he said indifferent, as he kicked up the red-colored earth with his white shoes.
It's blood. 11 men were beheaded here yesterday.
Nellie is standing in an execution ground.
Oh my goodness!
It's an ordinary thing for 10 to 20 criminals to be executed at one time. Roughly 400 prisoners a year.
Ah Cum tells them how in 1885,
50,000 rebels were beheaded, and locals could smell death a half a mile away.
Oh! In the corner of the yard was a cross leaning against a high stone wall. It looked like a crucifixion cross.
But before Nellie can even ask Ah Cum, he blankly said,
When women are condemned to death in China, they are bound to the wooden cross and cut into pieces. Men are beheaded in one stroke unless they're the worst kinds of criminals. The worst kinds of male criminals are given the death of a woman to make it even more disgraceful.
Nellie feels a shiver waggle down her spinal cord and unconsciously begins to twirl the ring on her finger. Before Nellie can even register all that she's learning, Ah Cum says,
Would you like to see some heads?
As if he were offering to show people some of that pottery.
I thought that the Chinese guide could tell as large stories as any other guide. So I said, coldly,
Certainly. Bring on your heads.
I tipped a man as he told me, with the clay of the pottery on his hands, went to some barrels which stood near the wooden crosses, put in his hand, and pulled out a head. The barrels are filled with lime, and as the criminals are beheaded, their heads are thrown into the barrels, and when the barrels become full, they empty them out and get a fresh supply.
Nellie touches her neck. She feels dizzy. This is not how Nellie anticipated spending her Christmas, where everyone back home in New York is waking up under the smell of pine and candles and presents. Nellie is staring at a pickled head of a decapitated Chinese criminal. Ah Cum then leads them towards the jailhouse, not too far away from the execution grounds. And Nellie is surprised to see all of the doors open.
When I got inside and saw all the passengers with thick, heavy boards fastened about their necks, I no longer felt surprised at the doors being unbarred. There was no need for locking them. The prisoners are unable to lie down or rest their heads on the floor, which led them to exhaustion. Their eyes were wide and milky from lack of sleep.
Nellie wants to sit down. Their next stop is a courthouse, a large square stone-paved building. Nellie notices a group of judges in a small room, and they're smoking opium, which is brought from India on those P&O ships that Nellie and Liz are using to race around the world. In another room, judges are playing Fantan. They wander to the back of the courthouses, and Ah Cum shows them local torture devices. As two thieves, chained to two poles, pass by, and they are about to have every bone in their body broken. Now, Ah Cum leads them to their palate cleanser. They head to temples in Canton. Now, there are over 800 temples in Canton to visit, and out of all of the temples that they could have visited, Ah Cum brings them to the Temple of Horrors.
Didn't we just do that?
Outside, beggars cry for alms. Nellie passes them by to stare at the carvings of Buddhist hell. Inside, she sees paintings of men being sawed in half, a demon attacking him, someone being boiled in oil, and others being stabbed. You know, the usual. Nellie tells Ah Cum she's going to go to another temple around the corner.
Don't be too long. We are going to the examination hall, a leper colony, and the Temple of the Dead after this.
He sure knows how to keep raising the stakes. So Nellie tries to go see something calming, and she enters the Temple of 500 Gods. Out of all of the temples Nellie will see on this trip, she believes that this building is the most impressive.
It's small, but filled with hundreds of golden Buddhas, all sitting at eye level. Some are smiling, others are calm and contemplative. And somewhere around that building is a professional writer telling people's fortunes.
Nellie would love a distraction from all of the intense activities she's been doing today. She approaches the fortune teller, who seems to speak English. He asks her if she's superstitious, and she says yes. So he says he will perform a lucky pigeon ritual, where he circles a blessed piece of wood around her and then drops it. Pigeons in China are seen as symbols of good luck and wealth. Nellie will remember that the next time one poops on her windowsill. He explains that if one side of the luck pigeon turns up, it's good luck, and if it's the other side that turns away, it's bad luck.
Oh, I could really use some good luck right now. Placing some joss sticks in a copper jar before the luck god, he took from the table 2 pieces of wood, worn, smooth, and dirty from frequent use, which, placed together, were not unlike a pear in shape. With this wood, he called it the luck pigeon, heeled with 2 flat sides.
The fortune teller begins swinging the pigeon over the joss sticks, and Nellie thinks about her trip. Her delay in Ceylon, the monsoon and harassment in the South China Sea, the news that another woman is racing her. How ridiculous! How is that possible? Nellie prays she will make it back to New York in under 75 days and beat this other woman. Then the man drops the luck pigeon, and she watches as gravity takes over. She holds her breath and tries not to get her hopes up. But her life feels as topsy-turvy as the wood flying around in front of her. They hit the ground and tumble and splay onto the ground. The man looks down and furrows his brow. Then he brings his head up to look at Nellie. She takes a big breath in and watches as a smile spreads across the fortune teller's face. The wood is in the shape of good luck. A Race Around the World was written, produced, researched, narrated, scripted, edited again, re-narrated, soundscaped, scored, mixed, mastered, and voiced by me, Adrien Behn. Sam Dingman was our editorial consultant and emotional support. The Crazy Man was played by Fabian Martinez Sanchez. The chief officer, newspaper man, Mr. Furman, and P&O office men were played by Sam Dingman. The P&O office manager was played by Nick Markovitz. Cum was played by Artin Yip. Father Time was played by Jake Dingman. Resources include 80 Days by Matthew Goodman, Around the World in 72 Days and Other Writings by Nellie Bly. And for more resources, go to our website, strangersabroadpodcast.com. Please go to Apple Podcasts to rate, review, and subscribe to A Race Around the World. If you leave a review, I will leave it at the end of the credits, like... Around the World fan gives it 5 stars, says, "What a story. Never heard anyone tell a story like this before. What a gem." Thank you. And if you're interested in all of the bonus content, anecdotes, and historical facts that didn't make it into the show, head over to our TikTok at Strangers Abroad Podcast. If you would like to email us, please send over a lovely message at strangersabroadpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and come back next week for the next leg in the adventures of Nellie Bly and Elizabeth Bisland. Safe travels to everyone listening.
Okay.
I'll be right here.
What did I do? Did I press record?
I think I already pressed record.
Oh my, it's been recording this whole time.
Yeah, we've been recording this whole time.